Dear colleagues, dear friends of the Macau Ricci Institute, a warm welcome to our forum, both here at the community of the Jesuits and also a very warm welcome for those who join us online. It is really great joy and honor to welcome Dr. Roderick O'Brien, who is an old dear friend of the Jesuits and of the Macau Ricci Institute. Therefore, we have chosen this kind of homey atmosphere tonight, and we look very much forward to your talk. We are, so to speak, still in the afterglow of our symposium of the 4th centenary of Ferdinand Verbiest. We have celebrated last week at the Yale Center, Beijing. And with Verbiest, we had also a missionary in China. They are clearly ranked. Nan Huairan is number 3, and a wonderful inspiration. Also a reminder is not only Matteo Ricci, but there are other missionaries. And today the focus is on an Austrian Jesuit, Johann Nepomuk Hinteröcker. So we see how this will resound in the Australian pronunciation, which also stands in this tradition of a priest who is a scientist. And so with Verbiest, we had many opportunities to reflect that religion, the wisdom traditions, are not opposed to science, but actually are partners of the promotion of science. So we could say the enlightenment, the Aufklärung, has been prepared by these missionaries in their cross-cultural mission. So that's what is, I think, most brilliantly developed by the philosopher Hermann Luebbe, religion after enlightenment. So Dr. Roderick O'Brien is a lawyer who was teaching extensively Hong Kong University, also in universities in the mainland, I think for 7 years in Xi'an. And out of nothing, he materialized once 20 years ago in Beijing. And ever since, he has deepened our friendship with the Ricci Institute. And we look very much forward, dear Roderick, to your speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, and thank you to all the Jesuit community for your welcome over many, many years. That has been a joy for me. So I bring you a gift from afar. At this time, there's nothing specific about China. In fact, this is a little gift from Australia. I could perhaps put on my best Australian accent, "G'day, how you going, all right?" and then try to pronounce Hinteröcker as best I can. But let me tell you, his name is not given the reverent pronunciation that it should in Australia. First, this is a picture which is probably one of the few that is around. And based on that, it's also one that was turned into a painting, which is hanging in the Aloysianum College and Jesuit House in Linz. He looks, well, a bit grumpy there, but I'm hoping what I can do for you is introduce this man, tell his story. And I think by the end of this night, you may have no more theory about science and religion. You may know nothing more about botany or bugs, but I think you will meet a man that you like. So the story begins in Upper Austria, and Hinteröcker was born into a wine-growing family on the not far from Linz city, a wine-growing family on the banks of the Donau River. He went to Linz to the Jesuits for his schooling and decided to join the Jesuits at 19 years of age. His formation as a Jesuit built on, if you like, his nature. He had already been a keen observer of nature, even as a child. His teachers gave him a fascination with nature, and he carried that into his Jesuit life. His early life as a Jesuit was somewhat upset because at that time, with the revolutions in Europe, the Jesuits were pushed here, there, and everywhere. This may have brought out one of his talents. One of his real talents was his ability with languages. And this stood him in particularly good stead. But he got to teach natural science. He ended up in Linz in the Aloysian, what is now the Aloysianum College, and he got to teach natural science. And he said how happy he was because his interest became his work. He was remembered for taking groups of students out and making it really interesting for them, for his own very widespread travels, collecting, and for his establishing in the grounds of the college a garden, a herbarium, if you wish, with hundreds of specimens to teach the students. And just adjacent, he established an arboretum of trees. This was a man who loved his work, got into it. But there is another story to him. He wanted to be a missionary. You can understand that was a big promotion, if you like, of the Jesuits at that time. And here he is in his 40s already, wanting to be a missionary. And for some reason, he latched onto the idea of being a missionary to the Aboriginal people of Australia. From Linz, from the comfort of that old tower, if you ever get a chance, go there, go to the library in the tower. It's a magnificent place. The archivist is the most wonderful, if slightly eccentric fellow. Oh, off go, aren't they all archivists? Off they go, off he goes, and he took the overland steamer route in 1866, and this is before the Suez Canal was built. So before that, people had to travel overland along part of Egypt and then join the steamer going to Ceylon, nowadays Sri Lanka. And so he took that route, which would have been not bad by his time, because a few years before, a railway had been built parallel to what is now the Suez Canal. Accompanied by Brother Eberhard, they came first to Sri Lanka, and then I really couldn't find a map with all the necessary scale, but you can see Sri Lanka go from Indian Ocean, go north, you can see Sri Lanka, come down to the bottom corner of Australia and across to Melbourne, just above the little island of Tasmania. I have to mention Tasmania. If we don't mention Tasmania in Australia, the Tasmanians complain. Sometimes they even get left off the map, and then they really complain. Anyway, so he and Brother Eberhard came out to Australia. Their first stop from Sri Lanka was that bottom left-hand corner of Australia, where they stopped for coaling and water and so on. And already he was ashore. Years later, we find in the Melbourne Botanic Gardens, which was a central repository at that time, we find a collection of herbs, things that he has collected. The first one, 1866, in that point, that harbour on his journey. Already, perhaps the ship stopped for a while. He was able to get ashore and spotted something. So really beautiful. He continued to South Australia, that part of Australia then the province of South Australia, to its capital, Adelaide. I think you can see that on the map. And then about 120 kilometers north of Adelaide, a tiny little place, Seven Hill, named by the Jesuits, and already they had an establishment there. He joined the establishment. He immediately planted a garden and collected animals and birds and so on. And the Jesuits, among other things, had a school, and he was instructing the students in the sciences. But he had a difficulty. There were hardly any Aboriginal people left near the Seven Hill. He prepared a couple for baptism. Well, I don't have any detail on that. And there was a plan to begin. You would keep in mind one of the principles of the Jesuit reductions in Paraguay was to get away from the Spaniards. Yes, Spaniards are nice people, but that was except it depends on which football team you barrack for. Anyway, they wanted to establish a kind of center for Aboriginal people which would not be near any white people. The government had agreed to give them land near Oodnadatta, which is about halfway up, no more. But in fact, the Jesuit the Jesuit superiors in Austria, they were Austrian Jesuits, the Jesuit superior in Austria said, no, you're going to need quite a lot of manpower to undertake such a project. We haven't got the manpower, and it will not continue. That was very sad for Hinteröcker. He came to be a missionary, and it didn't happen. Meanwhile, with his language skills, he could speak Polish. Wasn't everyone? He could speak Polish, and there were Polish settlers nearby, Polish Hill River, and he became chaplain to them. His English improved in leaps and bounds. At one point, he heard that the Irish Jesuits in the neighboring colony of Victoria were planning a mission to Aborigines, and there exists a letter that he wrote to them outlining his desire to serve and his little bit of experience. That letter, written in Latin, is now in the archives of the Irish Jesuits, and you can find it online. By the way, I'm talking from research that I have done. I have good documentation for nearly everything, and I'm very happy to provide the documentation, the references, but I don't want to clutter up, except one. I don't want to clutter up this talk with them. So there he is in South Australia. His pastoral work took him roaming as he had roamed in Europe over much of South Australia. But there, before we leave him, he is in Seven Hill, now a beautiful spot. The church, of course, is on the right hand of as you face is quite new, and the winery on the left hand. The brothers were making wine, I think, even before Hinteröcker, from a wine growing family, got there. But it's the building behind the trees in the center that gradually became first a school, later a seminary, later still, and now a retreat house. For those of you who are Jesuits and looking for a retreat, I invite you to consider Seven Hill, and the Vatican astronomer goes there for his retreat, but also they put lovely wine on the table. And when he first arrived, the bishop decided to take him traveling. And he went to a small town in the southern part of Panola, in the southern part of South Australia. I hope that's working for those who are watching online. but never mind, you can look these up. By the way, I should have said my thanks to those who are attending online. I'm really grateful for that. In Panola, he met two remarkable people. One is a priest, Julian Tennyson Woods, who also was a priest scientist, and a young woman who was being formed by Woods to become a religious sister, Mary MacKillop, and to found a religious order which would be different. It would be a fascinating story to share with you, except to say that, but it would take too long, and so you can follow that up for yourself. But Mary MacKillop has been canonized, so Australia's only canonized saint. She left a record of the whole party going to visit some amazing caves near Panola, the Narracourt Caves, which Julian Tennyson Woods was researching and which were attractive to visitors. He gives us an account of the Hinteröcker as someone who was just absolutely happy and fascinated. Everything was wonderful, everything was beautiful, and it really is. It's a really nice spot. And the joy that he found in his explorations, in his science, was something that 30, 40 years later, when St. Mary of the Cross MacKillop was writing the biography of Tennyson Woods, she remembered that not only that Hinteröcker had been such a scientist, but also his character of a man who was just joy-filled at nature. Tennyson Woods realized that Hinteröcker, they became friends both as scientists and as priests, and that friendship was maintained for the next 5-6 years until Hinteröcker's death. They really were kindred spirits in sharing science. But Woods was more a geologist, paleontologist, but at 19th century didn't have the categories that we have. He'd study anything. Because of the contact with Woods, Hinteröcker took up shells, studying shells, conchology, as he called it. And Woods, realizing that Hinteröcker had no library, hadn't brought scientific books with him, immediately sent a message to a friend in Melbourne to buy 4 volumes of a series which I think extended to 12, but at that stage it was 4 volumes of the discoveries of natural science in Australia. So Hinteröcker was then working out of Seven Hill, going on rural mission, rural placement. At one point, he traveled right out to, he went by boat to Port Lincoln and then right out to Streaky Bay by boat. And he made a good friend out there, a German shepherd who had gone to Australia and done very well. And within a couple of decades, he was running his own farms and had ships, small ships, to carry his goods. So Hinteröcker took advantage of his friendship with a Schlink, Anton Schlink, and just out of Elliston, there is a small island called Flinders Island, where he spent a few weeks and just really crisscrossed the island for his research. Unfortunately, we know he did that, but we no longer have the book, the notes that he wrote. That's all gone. We're dealing with someone who just kind of mixed his science and his pastoral work. Someone really good. Interestingly, he was not a great traveler. He wasn't a particularly good horseman. He fell off more than once. May not have been the most comfortable. And even in his youth in Austria, he had suffered occasionally from lung problems and from chest diseases. But that didn't stop him from being an intrepid explorer. At that town of Streaky Bay, where Anton Schlink lived, they in 1912 they built a church, and a new church, and they the officials, church officials, arrived by motor car, which in 1912 was something. But they remembered and made sure it got in the newspaper report that they remembered Father Hinteröcker arriving on a pack horse in 1868. So 66, 68, he's involved more and more in pastoral work and in the diocese. He had been the bishop's confessor at one point. Bishop chaplain, I think, is the expression that might be used. And he was drawn to Adelaide. The Jesuits in 1869 began their first parish in Adelaide, and Hinteröcker was appointed as the parish priest there. Very quickly, he found a house that would be suitable for them to live in, with enough ground to build a church. And he built a church there. Unfortunately, he fell in the cellar of the house which was being built and broke his leg. And so when the opening of the church came, he was still injured and was kind of towed around on a little trolley with a chair, and pulled by some of the altar servers. And some of the non-Catholic guests thought this was an interesting part of the ceremonial. I wonder if that normally happens when you open a church. His quip, I'll see if I can get that for you. The church has to be paid for. And Hinteröcker himself quipped that, I'm not sure where I've got this, that he would have to give up collecting plants and bugs and birds and animals so that he could collect pound notes and guineas, checks and bank orders to try to pay off the church. That's past parish life, very normally like that. There was, and I can't give you the detail on this at the moment, a very big crisis in the Catholic Church in Adelaide at this time. The crisis centered around his friend, Tennyson Woods, and St. Mary of Mary of the Cross McKillop, Mother Mary McKillop. And the crisis was for us, what was really only a small country town. As a colony, the first settlers only arrived in 1832, and we are in 1869, 70. Hinteröcker backed his friends, Tennyson Woods and Mary McKillop, and spoke in their favor. The Jesuits generally backed Mary McKillop and backed the right side. The bishop excommunicated Mary at this point. That's how difficult it all got. After a few months, perhaps on the direct persuasion of Hinteröcker, the excommunication was lifted after quite a short time. The divisions in the community, which spread over to the non-Catholic community in a small town of Adelaide, the divisions in the community were really quite harsh, and a commission of inquiry was established. Thank you very much. A commission of inquiry was established with two bishops, Bishop Quinn from Maitland and Bishop Murphy from Tasmania, Hobart in Tasmania. The bishops came, they took evidence, their job really was to try to calm everything down and to settle the situation. But they settled the situation by sending a number of priests, including Denison Woods, out of the diocese. And, but by basically exonerating from all problems Mother Mary the Killer. The two bishops found that knew that they had to send their report to Rome. All the evidence, of course, would have been given in English, but the report had to go to Rome in Italian and Latin. Guess who? Our linguist friend. Of course, he could speak Italian and write it, and he was good at Latin. So he became the kind of scribe or report writer. And by this stage, you see, very quickly, his English was very good. So off he go. So impressed is the bishop with the bishops with Hinteröcker's work and ability that the Bishop of Hobart invited him to go to Tasmania. Remember, that's the little island on the bottom that you're not allowed to forget. To go to Tasmania and to give missions to people, retreats for the clergy, and retreats for the religious sisters. Off he went. In Hobart, the capital, he did very well for some time, and there was given a lovely testimonial. He then travelled on to the north, the other end of the island, to the northern town of Launceston, to give the second part of his work, the centre. On the way, he caught a cold. It quickly turned into pneumonia, and at the age of 52, he died in Launceston. He was normally, I don't know what is the Jesuit custom for many missionary communities, you die, you're buried, wherever, anyway, but not for Hinteröcker. He had so impressed the Bishop of Hobart that he demanded that the mortal remains, go to Hobart for a very ceremonial funeral mass and burial. But this was not good enough for the people of Adelaide. This is still there. Not good enough for the people of Adelaide. So his remains were disinterred and carried by ship from Hobart to Adelaide, from Port Adelaide to the city on a train, and met at the city railway station by a cavalcade of people, children, adults, etc., who carried his remains in procession to the church that he had built, and these remains are still there under the roof, under the floor. Sorry. Almost immediately, a short booklet, The Last Days of His Life, was published in Austria. And a little while later, and this is the one reference which I'll give you at this point, an Augustinian monk named Feigl, F-A-I-G-L. That's my pronunciation. F-A-I-G-L. Published a 250-odd page biography. Apparently, Feigl was Hinteröcker's nephew or some kind of relative, and he had access to voluminous correspondence that he had sent home to his family. Feigl records many things for us that we otherwise wouldn't know, and the biography is a standard reference for him. One of the things, for example, a story that's recorded there, he was constantly sending specimens, etc., back to Europe. And at one stage, he sent a box of specimens back to Europe with an Englishman who was traveling back and agreed to take them. The ship sank, and so did the specimens. And Hinteröcker complained that He lost 12 specimens of this and some of that. I don't think he mentioned whether the Englishman survived the sinking or not. Probably did. I'm sure it did. But so some of his the specimens that he sent back from Europe are now from Australia are in collections in Europe. But because there's no central collecting authority for Europe, you don't necessarily know where they are. So a scientist, a man who loved his science. His friend Tennyson Woods wrote a beautiful eulogy for him. With him, the study of nature and the love of God went hand in hand. My, he would say in his broken English, such a pleasure. How the Lord loves this flower or this bird when he made it so beautiful. He was never idle, either among the flowers or examining rocks, minerals, zoological specimens, and always uniting such labours with some pious thought or aspiration. He was a true Christian philosopher. The result of this journey was a large collection of specimens for museums in Europe and a very large number of novelties. But it must not be thought that while he was thus zealous in the cause of science, that he was less alive to his duties as a mission priest. His zeal, on the contrary, of the most fervent kind. At any time, he would leave his studies or his specimens and travel miles to find out some bad Catholic or to help some waverer into the true church. His patience and care with everyone were proverbial. In the hospital, in the asylum, and wherever he went, it seemed as if he could not do too much. I'll stop there. I enjoyed talking about this fellow. I think I would have liked to have known him. But there's a little afterthought. Now, I hope I get this right. In Austria, currently, there is a wine company called Salomon Wines. And Bert Salomon, a few years ago, decided to establish a winery in the Southern Hemisphere in Australia. Came to Australia, formed a vineyard, still got it. And when he went back to Austria, he said to his family, you know, I think I'm the first to go to Australia. And some older, don't quote me on this, some older relative said, no, you're not. Your great-great-uncle, Johann Nepomuk Hinteröcker, was there in 1862. So Bert established a wine from the vineyard, which is south of Adelaide, near the Finniss River. And I've got a few bottles left. You can still get it. In fact, you could probably get it in Austria more easily than I've got it in Australia. So I invite you all, whenever you raise a glass, think of the good Father Johann Nepomuk Hinteröcker. I'm happy to take questions.